Welcome to Conversations on Sustainability, the podcast where we discuss issues surrounding sustainability, the environment, as well as the individuals and organizations working to create positive change. I'm your host, Henry Palmer. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations on Sustainability. In this episode, we are talking about pollinators and more specifically, bees. So really excited to talk about this topic. Being spring, these things are starting to come out again. People are starting to notice it. So really just want to dive in. So you might not know this, but in the United States, there are over 4,000 different species of bees. But between 1947 and 2019, approximately 60% of that bee population has declined. Now, you might sort of want to know how that relates to you. 1 in every 3 bites that you take is thanks to a pollinator being involved. So bees are essential to sustainability and how we go about in the world and our whole food systems. So to discuss this today, I'm joined by Emilee Elingburg of the Bee Cause Project based out of Charleston, South Carolina. And Emilee is an expert on all things bees. She's the director of educational programs at the Bee Cause Project, and she's an expert who has been doing this for a number of years and helping really educate young children around bees and pollinators and their role in sustainability. The Bee Cause Project, their goal is to bring bees to children and children to bees and help further facilitate education around pollinators. So Emilee, thank you so much for jumping on with us today and really looking forward to diving into it.
Absolutely. I'm super happy to be here. I'm just excited about talking about the sustainability and how we can help bees in our own backyards.
Amazing. So, Emilee, what I thought we might do for our listeners is really just start broadly and talk about just the impact of pollinators and impact of bees, just from a broad perspective, just to kind of frame our conversation about how these bees play such a critical role in sustainability in the environment.
All right, absolutely. I think one of the things that we strive for at the Bee Cause Project is to help create the next generation of environmental stewards. And so capturing children so that they respect and understand this insect and its impact on the world. And we also have to take that to adults too. There are a lot of adults that are squeamish about bees and will run away from a bee. Bees are extremely docile. This is the time of swarms. If you see a swarm, that's a really natural thing that happens in the world of honeybees. And they're not going to harm you. They really are just looking for a new home. Just kind of some perspective on it. Honeybees have been around for 30 million years, but bees are also called an indicator species, which means that their quality of life is reflective of what's happening in our environment. So when we see those numbers declining, like you mentioned, that 60% decline, they're telling us that something environmentally is going on. And
just jump in. It's sort of unbelievable in many ways. This tiny little creature is really that sort of canary in the mine shaft in many ways.
Absolutely.
If we pay attention to what's going on with bees, as you mentioned, an indicator of it raises questions about what's going on in the broader environment.
Absolutely. I mean, not just the honeybee, but native bees and solitary bees are really important for diversity of plant life, foods, nuts. And you had said 1 in 3 bites of food, which is absolutely accurate. But we also don't think about their impact to things like clothing. The fibers that we use to make clothing or rope or other materials are part of this bigger issue with bees. Between 75 and 90% of all flowering plants on Earth need pollinators. And that's not just bees, that's, all of the pollinators, including hummingbirds and, bats. Like it's a big issue. And then this fall, we went out to a farm and did a farm to table virtual field trip. And we got to see that strawberries, which are self-pollinating plants, the flower has male and female parts. That when those early berries start, you get a very different looking berry than the kind that you and I would want to get from a store or from a farmer's market. The top of the berry was beautiful and red. And then once we flipped it over and looked, the backside was completely white and it actually had an indentation in it because that is a berry that's a result of something that's not completely pollinated. So And the farm that we went to actually had their own beehives. So they referred to their honeybees as a natural resource there at their farm. And so they're relying on those honeybees, but they're also relying on the other native pollinators that are coming and visiting their strawberry fields as well. And March and April are their biggest harvest time for strawberries. Like, go pick your own strawberries. So those bees are really like just quintessential to what they're creating and providing.
It's amazing. And it's something that I, wasn't always fully aware of, that, 1 in 3 bites that we take is due to a pollinator, from apples to almonds to blueberries. And that, as much as anything else, the production of this food and these resources relies on these pollinators being involved. So thinking about them, as a resource in many ways is essential. And if we're not sort of caring for, the greater environment, then it's going to have a knock-on effect.
It absolutely is. And also, we think about not only what they're doing for us as far as pollination, but what they do for us as far as providing honey.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting thing. Honeybees are the only insect that provides something that we want to eat. No other insect on earth makes anything that a human wants to eat. And I mean, honey also never spoils. Like, sometimes you'll get those little crystals in the bottom, but if you just put the bottle in warm water, they go away. And I mean, they found honey in like tombs from ancient Egypt that's still edible. It's just fascinating. And the whole process of how honey gets made. Like, if you want to get a kid on board, talk about how honey is made. They bring the nectar back and they literally regurgitate it from their honey sac into each other's mouths, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until they get the water content so low. And then they put it in the cell and they fan it with their wings until it becomes this delightful, thing that they want to eat and we want to eat and bears want to eat and lots of other things want to eat. And it's wonderful. It's when we would take kids to camp, and when I was a teacher, we couldn't give them necessarily a cough drop or a cough syrup if their parents hadn't given us permission, but you can always give them honey, and it coats the throat and is a natural cough suppressant. So there's a lot of benefits of honey as well, other than the deliciousness.
It's so interesting, as you talk about this. And, I recently got into beekeeping a little while back and was just fascinated, the sort of thinking about the impact and thinking about the sort of broader size of it. But what was interesting to me is introducing a hive and the thought of the kind of local environment that we're presenting these bees to. So, okay, first of all, it was it was my COVID project with our children. And so to what you just mentioned,
yeah.
Just the engagement was incredible. And just getting in the hive, working the hive and seeing all the bees, identifying the queen and so on. But what I thought was so interesting was the questions it brought up around about what your local environment is and what you have going on at your home and in your garden and so on. I was wondering if you could sort of tell us a little bit more about that, just to, we started broad, just bring it down a little to another level, what's happening in our backyards and how people should think about bees and so on.
Absolutely. So, when we're looking at that decline in honeybees and bees in general, it's really concerning. So kind of what are the top levels of our concern? So loss of habitat is one of them. So as they're turning under soil and putting up more buildings and more houses, then you're looking at a loss of habitat for those bees. So that also means a loss of food source. And, without food, they starve. And that does happen to bees. They do starve to death. Sometimes a hive will die from that. And then the other really is more about the misuse of chemicals for humans. And there's a lot of direction online on how to use chemicals properly and how to dispose of chemicals properly. And I think that's just kind of a community issue on how we do that. So like you said, what are the things that we can do? Creating spaces for our pollinators. And for our honeybees and for native bees. So you've seen probably the little native bee houses that are sold at stores. You can design your own. You can buy a kit and create those. So those are really great, but you need to know a few things about what a native bee wants. A native bee doesn't want water in their house. So putting it under something with a little bit of an awning or a roof. They also don't like, typically on the back of them, they have like one little hanger. They don't want to be moving around in the breeze. They don't want to be wiggling. So really securing that on the side of your house. And we put one up, and we've had several native bees move in, and they like different size openings all into and be able to lay their eggs. Buying native plants is another really big one. You had mentioned at the beginning that this is the time of year that people want to start working in their yard, especially during the time of COVID, when you can't control a lot of other things. You can control what's going on
Exactly.
in your backyard. I mean, you can get in there and build something really special. And so instead of just rolling down the street to maybe a local big box place, finding a native plant nursery, something a little more mom and pop, somebody that's done the legwork for you. And so you honestly, here in our local nurseries, you can show up and say, I need a native for this much sun, this much water. I'm trying to, bring the pollinators into my backyard, and they will be the ones that will point it out to you. So you kind of just get better service anyway with that. The native trees and native shrubs are also really important, not just your perennials and annuals that are going to give you like this big bang for your buck in the spring and the summertime. I mean, bees eat year round, just like we do.
That's such an interesting point, right? It needs to, because they're working from, flower to flower and shrub to shrub. And I certainly noticed this, that, this plant was in bloom, and now all of a sudden this week it's, full of bees. And then, that bloom moves on, and then they're all off to the next plant and so on. And so to your point, like having those food resources available.
Right. Something that's year round. So that's kind of another goal, just as a person that's going to, and it doesn't have to be huge. I mean, think about container gardening and how just a container or a few containers of something that is good for the pollinators is really helpful. Milkweed is something you can get for free. There's a website that will send you free milkweed seeds, and it's pretty easy to start. And then all those butterflies that are going to be part of that great butterfly migration, you're just having a host plant for them. Herb gardens are really easy to do. And a lot of times, if you're okay sharing your feast, planting things like basil and dill, you're going to have butterflies come and lay their eggs there in your herb garden. So you're sharing with them, and then their larvae is going to come out and eat that host plant. So you're really helping not only the insect at its adult age, you're also helping it as it's coming into the world.
What's so interesting to me, as you're talking about this, and the kind of imagery that comes to mind is, we have this idea of like a quintessential like front yard and backyard, that kind of American home, and people are striving for that like almost golf course style lawn and so on, and no dandelions or anything like this. And that's all well and good, but you're creating a sterile and almost dead environment. And you're not going to have the pollinators aren't going to be able to survive there. They have to have something to feed off of. So that playing a role, and of course in order to create that sort of golf course style putting green lawn, the chemicals that you're going to be applying to your yard and so on, that's going to have to that requires to create that. And if you do that, the bees are going to pick that up, take that back to the hive, the knock-on effect that's going to have.
Right. And those chemicals stick around for longer than just the season that you put them out. And I think we all kind of fall victim to wanting it to look a certain way and kind of keeping up with your neighbors. But you're right. It definitely creates a really sterile environment, and you're not really hosting anything. We have been composting in our yard for years. And when we dig in our flower beds, if you haven't hit a worm, it's surprising. Like every hole that you dig is something is in there. Something's crawling or something's wiggling. And that's really a better indicator of a healthier lawn. We decided as a family this spring to go no mow in our backyard. So we have a fence. Our neighbors can still see it. No one's complained so far. But we've really just let the clover and the natural weeds, they're weeds. We've let the dandelions grow. And we still have our flower beds that are also pollinator friendly, but just that grass area, we've just let it do what it wants. And you can walk out there and count just tons of honeybees and carpenter bees and bumblebees, and they're out there just feasting on all of it. And we do keep our front yard cut a little nicer, but so far, like we actually had someone stop by and ask, like, what's going on? And we chatted for quite a while about this is what we're willing to offer. And until we get, an HOA notice, then we're just going to let it go for a while. April showers bring May flowers. So May is really going to be the time where our flowers are just bursting open. But until then, these beginning flowers, which clover is a flower, is there for our bees and for our pollinators. And I hate seeing it get mowed down like on those big stretches like highway. I mean, let's just leave it. Let's just let the native plants grow. And even if you can't choose to do like an entire yard, you could pick a space in your backyard that you're willing to say, this is like a, 4-foot space that I'm willing to say no mow. And
this is why I was so interested to chat with you and the Bee Cause Project today, because we're in this sort of springtime period and everyone's, especially where I am in New England, weather's starting to turn a little bit warmer, and then there's just this race to get outside and start working on your yard and start, doing all this, and just bringing some awareness to what you're doing out there, and that it is an ecosystem. And that, there are these other players and these pollinators out there, and you have to, have some sort of consideration to, to the impact your gardening is having.
Yeah. And, talking about the native plants, I mean, even if you just go out and buy several packs of seeds of like a bee mix or something that you can dedicate a space in your yard to. Honeybees specifically have flower fidelity. So that means that when a forager bee leaves her hive, she's going to visit the same type of flower on that entire journey. So if you have a field of clover, you are making her job easier. If you have a field of coneflower or a field of a type of wildflower, so she's going to spend that entire journey just visiting that one flower. And then she's going to take the nectar and the pollen back to the hive from that one type of flower. It's why you might see different colors of honey. So, if you're buying clover honey, it's going to have a different color than like a black sage honey or an orange blossom honey. So like it literally, it looks like stained glass when you hold it up to the light in the comparison of what these bees have been going and foraging for. So that's just another really interesting part of that honey process.
It's just, for me, and we can talk for hours about this because it's just so fascinating, their entire, their network and the systems of how the bees operate and what they're doing and how the hive operates. But before we sort of go too far down that rabbit hole, because I would happily nerd out and talk to you about this, for ages. Talk to me more about now what you guys are doing at the Bee Cause Project and how you're using education and as a vehicle and so on.
Well, our big goal is connecting kids to nature, and we do that through the wonder of the honeybee. So part of what we do is we give hive grants, live hive grants, and you can visit our website, and you can also join our newsletter so that you can find out details about that. But really, you might end up with an observational hive where the bees are actually coming in through a small connection out to the outside where they can come and go. And you're seeing this stack of frames with a clear front and clear back to it. So you can actually see what's happening in the hive. Kids are riveted by it. They literally run across the room. Who can find the queen? What's going on? Where are the brood combs? It's fascinating. Even grown-ups are like, get out of my way. I want to find the queen too. We also do more traditional hives. So if you already have a garden or you're beginning to build your bee garden, then you could go with a more traditional Langstroth hive. And so we do those, and we are at 550 plus schools internationally. We've got schools in Canada, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, and Haiti as well. So yeah, it's a big, our goal is 1,000 schools. So we're getting there. And the hives are super awesome, but you might not be at the point of having a hive yet. Or if you do have a hive, what next? How do you teach about that hive? So another thing that we offer is full curriculum for people that want to teach pollinator education. So we've got things like a 6-week bee unit where you could teach it front to back and cover all the aspects of a honeybee. You could pull apart. You can use it for a summer camp. We have homeschool families that will get a group together and teach about this. We've got a lot of really great partners, Nature's Partners, the Sweet Virginia Foundation, and Edible Schoolyard are some of the great people that have offered to share their resources with us so that we can really work to offer something K-12. And not just videos, not just books, but experiments, labs, like really hands-on experiences.
Well, and that to me, that's what's so, amazing about what you guys are doing. And when we first connected, and just having my own personal experience with working with the children and working with a hive in my own backyard, but that, the bee is so critical to our environment and so critical to sustainability and so on. But it's that hands-on education and creating that understanding, which I think is so important, and that you guys are able to do and bring to, young children and just bring that awareness that this isn't a creature that you need to be terrified of. Not at all. Actually, they are, you need to say, thank you, little bee, for, apples and so on. And that impact. And I think it's just such an, building awareness around science, around sustainability, around impact. All these pieces are just so interesting. To see that kind of come into play with what you guys are doing is tremendous.
Thank you. I think my favorite part are the virtual field trips, just because I got to go on them. During this time when teachers were really struggling, I shouldn't say just teachers, but educators, librarians, everyone was really struggling with programming during the time when we were shut down. And so we created a lot of things where you could watch this video of how honey gets harvested and jarred. And we created educator guides to go with that. So we gave the teacher the background in order to have this conversation about how this works, and creating things like card work. So even if you can't be face to face, you can look at these beautiful images of how these bees make this honey, and they're learning a process. Systems is something that we really want children to understand, how something goes from one place to the next place and all the intricate details within that system. And we really tried to offer that to them, even though we were at a distance. And so hopefully this September, getting back into our grant cycle, we'll be able to put a lot more hives in a lot more schools, and really have the kids get to benefit from seeing it live and in person. Because the honey harvest was my first honey harvest, and I was literally like a kid in a candy store. I wanted to touch everything, hold everything, taste everything, smell everything, and it was really fascinating.
So just quickly, we've taken it from starting broadly, talking about the just broad scale impact of pollinators. We brought it down to what's happening in your backyard, and we've come down even further, talking about the impact of education and what that does, creating the next generation of interested and engaged students that want to learn about this. If I had to sort of pin you down and ask you, what is one bit of information that you would like to leave listeners with, something that they should take with them, a bit of awareness around pollinators, around bees, what would that be?
I think first step, as far as a homeowner or a person, even an apartment renter, or I think pick something that you can do, whether it's something small like a container garden, or making, a bee water tray where you give the bees fresh water with landing spots. Pick something, even if it's just one thing to start with. Another thing is that the education is catching. Learn something about a native bee or a honeybee. Do the research, even if it's just something, simple, and then pass it on. Get excited about it and pass it on to someone. You never know how that's going to, continue to pay it forward. And I think the other thing is that I would really just encourage people to visit our website. We are thebeecause.org, and check us out. Check out our education, check out our resources, check out all of our, let that be the place that you start to get excited.
It's just hearing you say that, and it's so funny because it's this theme that we kind of keep coming across again and again. And the more we talk about this, and it's so funny with bees as well, that lots of littles start to make a big. A single bee makes just a tiny amount of honey, but a hive, can produce a tremendous amount of honey each year. And these lots of littles make it big. And to your point with education, you know, these little steps, building awareness and creating this impact such that we can, build a more sustainable and healthy world.
Right.
Emilee, I can't thank you enough for taking the time with us today. Again, it's the Because Project. We'll have details in the show notes and so on. Thank you so much again. This has been tremendous. And yeah, keep up all the amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.